Okay, good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I've been looking forward to today's session. It's a good one. We're welcoming back Claire Donovan. Many of you probably already know it's a familiar face, but for those that don't, Claire is the Head of Policy Research and Campaigns at End Furniture Poverty. And she's joining us today to talk about the latest report, the extent of furniture poverty. It feeds in quite well with a number of the sessions that we've been doing really over the course of the last year, more generally on kind of cost of living type issues, and then also how that might interface with the kind of with housing related, direct housing related matters. So yeah, really pleased. Before I do so, just a couple of housekeeping matters. Apologies that everybody is currently on mute, but there'll be opportunities as we go through to ask questions, both in the chat function and in person as we go through. I know Claire's got a presentation. Claire will, in the usual fashion, she'll share this and then we'll distribute it to everybody afterwards. As I mentioned, we'll post a recording of this also on our YouTube channel, and I'll be in the background monitoring the kind of the chat and coming in if you need me, Claire, at any point as well. So thanks everybody for joining today. I'm going to hand over to Claire now. So welcome, Claire. Thank you. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks very much, Darren. Thank you for having me. It's great to be here. So I'm going to share my screen and hopefully this will all work smoothly.
That looks great.
Fantastic. So as Darren says, I'll run through the presentation. Obviously, feel free to pop any questions in the chat, and obviously we'll take questions at the end. So first of all, for those of you who don't already know End Furniture Poverty, we're the campaigning arm of a group of registered charities and social businesses, 100% not-for-profit social businesses, known collectively as FRC Group, and it includes Bulky Bobs, which is one of the biggest furniture reuse charities in the country, and FRC Living and Buckingham Interiors, both of which sell new furniture. We've also got Reuse IT, which gives away and sells at low cost IT equipment as well. We're here, End Furniture Poverty is here to raise awareness of furniture poverty and to help to develop national solutions. It helps that we have the expertise and experience of the wider organisation to draw on, but we are very much an independent campaign. And we do lots of different things. We've written guides to help people to find essential furniture, and we've written a range of research reports, all of which are available on our website. We work with other charities as well to lobby government for funding to alleviate poverty, as well as adequately fund things like local welfare schemes and crisis support. And we do a lot of work with social landlords, trying to support and encourage and persuade them to look at furniture provision. And we also promote furniture reuse, again, primarily in the social housing section. We do a lot of work with the reuse network as well. We also get lots of emails every year. The DWP gave our contact details to every job centre in the country. So we get lots of emails from people asking for advice on where to find furniture. So we answer all of those and try to give people as much information as we can. So again, very briefly, this is our definition of furniture poverty. This is what we're here to talk about. It's the inability to afford or access basic furniture, appliances or furnishings that provide a household with a socially acceptable standard of living. So it's not just about being able to buy furniture. You might be able to access it through a furnished tenancy or through a local welfare scheme or charity support. Obviously, if you can't, you will move into or remain in furniture poverty, which is lacking one or more of the essential items. And it's very much a scale. You know, at one end, we have furniture insecurity, and there are millions of people in furniture insecurity. So they've got everything they need for now. They've got all the essential items. But if something breaks or needs replacing, they won't have the money to do that, and they'll move into furniture poverty. Then at the other end, we have furniture destitution. And this is someone who's got none or very few of the items that they need. So typically this could be somebody moving from homelessness, somebody fleeing domestic violence, or even as simple as someone moving from furnished accommodation in the private rental sector into an unfurnished property in the social housing sector. And these are those essential items. These are the items we think everybody should be able to access. Some on this list are much harder to get hold of than others. Flooring, for example, is really, really difficult to get hold of. Very few local welfare schemes and very few grant givers provide flooring. You may have seen from the BBC coverage of this report, the extent of furniture poverty that we're talking about today. There are some significant issues with social landlords removing flooring when tenants move out, but I'll come back to that. We know a television on this list is perhaps a bit controversial. It's not going to be included in a furnished tenancy scheme, but we do believe it is essential, and it's perhaps interchangeable with a laptop or a tablet. It's a communication device, a link with the outside world. And I think particularly if you're elderly, perhaps can't get out much, a television can be your only link with that outside world. For this piece of research, though, we took the decision not to include a television on our list of questions, simply for pragmatic cost reasons. It was quite expensive to get the research done with NatSen, the organisation that we worked with. So we did take it off the list. So the extent of furniture poverty, the report we're here to talk about today. The reason we did this research is we wanted to be able to say how many people are living in furniture poverty. So working with NatSen, which is a really strong reputational social research company as opposed to a market research company. So they really make sure they get a really full wide range of demographics involved in the research. It's a particularly representative one, so that was very important to us. So we used our panel of just over 5,500 people, and that gives us statistically significant data. So from that, we're able to say this is representative of the UK as a whole. People were presented with a list of those essential furniture items, minus the television, and they were asked, do you have these items in your home? And then for any of the items that they said, no, I don't have them in my home, they were asked, is this because you don't want it? Or because you can't afford or access it? So it's really solid data. You know, we haven't accidentally included people who don't want a table and chairs in our list of people living without a table and chairs. It was very specific. If you haven't got these items, do you want them or can you not afford them? We also conducted 10 interviews with people living in varying degrees of furniture poverty to capture the reality of living without essential furniture items, and hearing their stories and understanding the full impact across so many parts of their lives, and the extraordinary lengths they've gone to try to find the items that they needed was really moving, and those case studies are in the report. Then we also did a secondary survey online to give a more statistical response to those impacts of living without essential furniture items. And these are the figures. Because NatSen's panel consists of over 18-year-olds only, we have two sets of figures that we work with. So we've got from the actual survey, we know there are 4.8 million adults living without at least one essential furniture item, so living in furniture poverty. And we worked with NatSen to work out what that looked like across the whole population, so including children as well. And that gave us the total figure of 6 million people, which is 9% of the population. We also decided to introduce a new classification, which we're calling deep furniture poverty. And this is to highlight the numbers of people who are living without more items. So over 1 million adults are living in deep furniture poverty, and that means they're missing 3 or more essential furniture items. And getting that figure of 9 million items missing in British homes allowed us to do a relatively rough calculation, but to just give us an understanding of how attainable is it to end furniture poverty. Now, of course, these figures will have risen now. The data was captured last summer, and the cost of living crisis has meant that more people will be struggling, more people, their cookers will have broken, their circumstances will have changed, and there'll be more people in furniture poverty. But working on these figures, and we used an average cost of £250 per item to give us a snapshot figure that it would cost £2.25 billion to end furniture poverty in that moment, which I think is attainable. You know, I do feel that it's attainable, and we know at the end of the day, this is about poverty, and there are many more wider issues to consider, but it does give us hope. So I'm just going to quickly run through all of the essential items and focus on the impact of living without each of these items. The child's bed figure is shocking. So at least 740,000 children in the UK don't have their own bed to sleep in. A couple of weeks ago, we decided to launch Time for Bed in Merseyside, where we're based. So it's a fundraising appeal to give away free beds to children across Merseyside. It's a project that's been in the pipeline for over a year now, but it turned out to be very appropriate that we launched it at roughly the same time as launching this report. And as I say, it is at least 740,000 children, because respondents were asked if they had an individual place in a bed for every child in their household, with a yes or no response. So if the answer was no, I don't have an individual place in a bed for every child in our household, that was counted as one. But of course they could have more than one child who was without a bed in that household. So as terrible as that figure is, we think it will be higher. We all know the importance of getting a good night's sleep, the difference it makes to our ability to function and thrive. And for children, I think it's even more important. Poor sleep can really affect their life chances. I thought I'd include a positive quote here. So this is from a mom who received help from Time for Bed. And she said that the children have a sense of pride in their bedroom, having a nice bed to sleep in. It's more than just the physical bed. It's the sense of safety and warmth provided to this family. It's this belief that there are people who care, something which is quite difficult to believe when you're in a state of despair. So I think that shows the sort of the inverse of living without a bed, that the difference actually being given a bed can have to you and your children and your family. So onto flooring. As I say, the BBC coverage we got focused very strongly on flooring. And I think that's partly because people find it really hard to believe that so many social landlords rip out flooring between tenants as a matter of course. It's one of those ones where people go, they do what? And I think the impact of that is reflected in the social housing figures here. So 1.2 million people are living without flooring. 61% of those are living in social housing. Flooring's expensive, and if you move into a property with nothing and you haven't got a cooker or a fridge or a bed or flooring is going to be at the bottom of the list usually, but that's not to say it's not really, really important. And as I've said, very few local welfare schemes or grant givers provide help with flooring, so it is difficult to get hold of. The Welsh Government are looking at this, so they have a new decent home standard. It's been out to consultation and it's due to be sort of formally put in place in the autumn. And that will say that social landlords must provide flooring in all habitable rooms. They've got till 2030 to do it, but that's going to be a big change. Now, we have had word that the decent home standard in England, which is going to be consulted on in the autumn, so it's a bit further back down the road, it's a bit of a way off, but we're hopeful that that will include flooring, and we're hopeful that England will follow Wales with this. Even so, there's still going to be a time to go, and people do need flooring now. So for now, we would like landlords, and we're talking to landlords all the time, and really reiterating this point, we would like them to inspect flooring, clean it and leave it in place for the next tenant if it's of a reasonable quality. Obviously it's not always going to be suitable, but a lot of the times it is. And otherwise we have a situation like this quote here, someone we interviewed who said it's cement downstairs and upstairs it's wood and lots of nails sticking out. It's a hazard, it's really not ideal. I have a young child, so a really sort of difficult situation for someone to be in. So 870,000 people living without curtains or blinds. And the quote on here is from a solicitor who contacted me last week. As she said, no curtains is really scary for a victim of domestic violence suffering from PTSD. She said they regularly work with victims of domestic violence who are moved out of temporary accommodation or shelters and into unfurnished properties. And having nothing at your windows can make you feel really exposed and vulnerable. It also means your home can be much colder. It can affect your sleep. And again, there's very little support out there for window coverings. And of course, it's not just the curtains or the blinds, it's the curtain poles and the fitting, which requires tools, which many people don't have and can't access. So again, it's something that we would like social landlords to look at is providing window coverings. So on to appliances, all so essential to daily life. The challenges of storing and preparing food without a fridge or a cooker are immense. People can end up living on microwave meals or takeaways, which has health implications and impact on cost and much more. Some people need a fridge to store vital medication. The quote here is from Peter, who has a brain disease, and it affects his memory, and he hasn't got a fridge, and he's supposed to store his medication in a fridge. So he uses his friends, and he takes it round to his friends in a bin bag. And he says, I keep taking my medication, but some days I forget what I've taken, carrying them around in a bin bag. So ridiculous situation. And, even from a sort of a public purse point of view, apart from the terrible toll this is having on Peter's life, the additional cost to the NHS of having to deal with Peter, whose health is going to be worsened by the fact that he's not able to take his medication in the way that he should. So a really terrible situation. And not having a freezer means you can't do things like bulk buy or batch cook. There are a few laundrettes around and they are very expensive. So these are all sort of examples of the poverty premium. You know, ironically, it often costs more to live without. Sofas are at the heart of the home. You know, it's where we come together as a family to relax and socialize, where we sit with friends. And living without a sofa makes that so much harder and can lead to various forms of social isolation. So again, that 740,000 people living without a sofa. And again, 2 of the quotes here from their case studies: I don't have visitors. They'll say, well, pop round, come and see your new place. And I'm like, no, I'll come to you. And then the second one was a mom, and she said, you know, she hardly sees the kids anymore because they're in the bedrooms all the time, because they don't come together because there's nowhere for them to sit. So difficult again. Dining table and chairs, this was the biggest figure, you know, arguably perhaps slightly lower down the priority list of furniture items. And to be very clear, this is people who wanted a dining table and chairs but can't afford or access one. And, you know, it's not just for eating meals, although that is important to come together as a family. It's also places where children can complete homework, where adults can sit down and do things like job applications, or, you know, deal with paperwork. And so, yeah, another big figure. And these are some of the key socioeconomic findings. And I think some of the figures that really stood out for us are here on the slide. Some of the figures were, as you would expect, 26% of single parent households are living in furniture poverty. Obviously, that is a group that you would sadly expect to see having particular issues. And the figure here for the lowest income quartile, so people on the lowest income, 60% of people on the lowest income are living in furniture poverty. But I think the fact that 22% of people in furniture poverty sit in those higher upper 2 income brackets shows that furniture poverty can affect a really broad range of people. Furniture is expensive, you know, and the cost has gone up significantly. It's gone up by over 50% in the last 10 years. So, you know, they can be difficult things to access. And living with a disability means you're 3 times more likely to be in furniture poverty than someone without a disability. And it all helps us to build a picture of the scale of the issue. So to drill down a little further into those headlines, we weren't surprised to see that unemployed people are far more likely to be in furniture poverty than other groups. As you can see here, 29% of unemployed people are in furniture poverty. However, there are still 1.8 million people who are in work living in furniture poverty. And I think that highlights again that reality of in-work poverty. And I think the figure of 15% of people in full-time education in furniture poverty, apparently 1 in 5 students at Russell Group universities are reported to be considering dropping out because of the cost of living crisis. And our figures really support that finding. And we risk education being even more only the option for people from lower income, from higher income brackets, again, widening inequality in the UK. People from minority ethnic groups are more than twice as likely as those from white British backgrounds to experience furniture poverty. We found 7% of white British people are living without essential furniture items compared to 25% of all Black and Black British people. And while we sadly did expect there would be some clear differences between the different ethnic groups, I think we were really shocked to discover that 1/4 of an entire ethnic group are living without essential furniture and appliances. But again, I think this further emphasises the unequal society that we're living in. And living with a disability, as I've already mentioned, means there's a very high likelihood that you'll be living in furniture poverty. 55% of people in furniture poverty have a disability, and that's 2.6 million people. And of course, we also know that disabled people are likely to have quite specific furniture needs. It could be things like specially adapted beds or specially adapted seating. And that's unlikely to be offered in, for example, a furnished tenancy scheme, even if there's one available, or through a local welfare scheme. So what is already a high at-risk group for poverty becomes even more at risk for furniture poverty. We found housing tenure to be one of the strongest indicators of furniture poverty, which reinforced our long-held view that the social housing sector has a really key role to play in ending furniture poverty. So the figure here, 26% of social housing tenants live in furniture poverty. That translates to 2.3 million people. And while only 17% of the UK population are social housing tenants, they make up 48% of those in furniture poverty. And, you know, of course, the fact that social housing is there to house people on the lowest incomes, it means that figure will be higher. But it also firmly emphasises why the time is now for the social housing sector to step up and do more and to support their tenants with furniture. And we've done so much work on this, really highlighting huge benefits for the landlord as well. The increase, the reduction in their rental arrears, the reduction in things like their void and churn costs because they make tenancies more sustainable. Lots of information again on our website about this. We found that 3% of homeowners are living in furniture poverty, although I think, we are facing again another situation now with obviously mortgage rises, which are going to leave people in precarious financial situations. And 15% of private renters are living in furniture poverty, but we do expect that figure to have risen because rents are obviously going up. More and more renters are facing unaffordable rent rises, which is going to leave them with very little disposable income to cover the unexpected costs that come from something like a cooker breaking. And while we know that 29% of private rental accommodation does come as furnished compared to that 2% in the social housing sector, it still leaves the majority in unfurnished accommodation, which obviously for some is fine, but for others it can be very, very challenging. And I think this table really clearly shows that inequality between housing tenure. So this is the items missing across different types of housing tenure. So people who own their property, and that's own or with a mortgage, people living in social housing and people who are renting privately. And as you can see here, social housing tenants come top in every category, and it scores particularly highly for missing flooring and window coverings and freezers. And please remember there are 4 times more homeowners than social or private tenants in the UK. So even in the columns where the numbers of items missed are similar across the different tenures, the likelihood of a homeowner missing the item is in fact far less because there are so many more of them. And this chart again really shows that that discrepancy. So the orange column is those owner occupiers, the red column is people in social housing, and the grey column is people who are renting privately. And this is items missing per 1,000 people across different housing types. And as you can see again, flooring, those second bars, obviously it's huge in social housing, along with curtains and blinds. But I think all the items show that the social housing sector is falling behind. And this chart shows us some of the geographical figures. So the number of people we surveyed was more than sufficient to give us really robust national figures. So, we were able to translate the percentage of people in our 5,500 sample to the population. But in order to get equally robust figures for the different geographical areas, we would have had to have surveyed thousands more in each of the areas to get strong enough figures. So we had to bring them together to look at quite broad areas. So north of England, Yorkshire and Humber, for example, and Midlands and the east of England. It would be wonderful to be able to get figures down at a local authority level. And then what we would love to do is correlate that between whether there is a local welfare scheme provided with that local authority or not. But that would be a very, very expensive piece of work to get the numbers that would have been required. What we have done is we're gathering the data. We've done a number of reports looking at local welfare schemes, local authority run crisis schemes. And at the moment, we've got freedom of information requests coming back in, looking at what local authorities spent last year and what they're planning to spend this year. And we've also got figures from the Scottish Welfare Fund and the Discretionary Assistance Fund in Wales. So we will be looking to see if we can see any type of correlation between obviously areas where there's less crisis support and the numbers in furniture poverty. We expect we will do, but we like to make sure we have the evidence to back it up. Okay. And then to a certain extent, as I said, the survey, I guess, told us what we already knew. Living without essential furniture items is bad for you. And the responses to this online survey, this was for people who were living in furniture poverty. It highlighted the impact it can have on people's health. And given how many people living in furniture poverty have a disability, that's particularly worrying. And that social stigma, 8 in 10 respondents said that they felt less able to invite people into their home, and 7 in 10 felt ashamed or embarrassed of their home. And when it comes to arguments about why furniture poverty is something that we should all be concerned about, beyond the obvious reasons that in this day and age, in the 6th largest country in the world, it's really not good enough, but There is the fact that actually it costs us all money, the increased cost to the NHS, to social services, and something that we didn't touch on in this survey, but the increased that cost of increased debt through either the poverty premium of living in furniture poverty, the fact it's more expensive to live in furniture poverty, or people taking on unmanageable debt trying to buy items. That can leave people unable to cover other essential costs such as their rent, which can lead to rental arrears and ultimately can lead to eviction, which means the local authority takes on the cost of providing the temporary accommodation and yet more cost to the public purse. And all of these, plus of course our primary goal, the moral imperative, vital reasons why we need to end furniture poverty. So now we know the extent of the problem, and of course there's much more information in the report if you want to go into more detail on some of the areas touched on in the previous slides. Now we need to look at how we're going to do something about it, how are we going to tackle it. So I'll start with those key routes out of furniture poverty with an update on the latest developments, starting with local welfare schemes. As I've already mentioned, these are local authority run crisis schemes. And as I said, we've had 3 reports on this again on our website. The most recent found there were 35 local authorities in England who closed their schemes. So if you live in that local authority area, there isn't a scheme, you can't access it. And that's left over 14 million people without support. The last couple of years have been quite a muddy picture because we had local authority COVID grants coming into play and now the Household Support Fund. But we've managed to navigate our way through and see what support is on offer in general and specifically what support is on offer for furniture and appliances. So as I've said, we're getting those freedom of information requests back in now. And we're looking at the local welfare spend, last year, budget this year, number of applications. Do you provide furniture and appliances, and if so, which ones? And we're also looking at the Household Support Fund. So how are you spending it? Are you using it for furniture and appliances, etc., etc.? So we're aiming to get that published before the end of the year. Of course, it depends on how quickly the local authorities come back to us. But we do expect the picture for furniture support to have worsened. Obviously, we'll see as we get that data in. But I think there's so much focus on food and fuel, understandably so, that I think in some areas furniture and appliances are getting pushed out. But I think, as we always say, if you can't afford food, you're not going to be able to afford to replace a broken cooker. So I think that, you know, we are going to see many more people moving into furniture poverty. And I think we may find, although it's not coming through yet in the data, that more local authorities will close their local welfare schemes to focus on the Household Support Fund, but we haven't seen that yet, so we'll have to see. But the Household Support Fund is currently only guaranteed till the end of March, and after that we have no news yet. I mean, when the government announced previous tranches of the Household Support Fund, it was very, very last minute. So obviously, if there's a general election, well, there will be a general election next year, then you know, possibly we may get an announcement before that, but nothing as yet. In Liverpool, which is where we're based, it's the second biggest local welfare scheme in England, and they've taken the decision in this financial year to not allow social housing tenants to apply for home needs awards, which is furniture and appliances. Instead, they're being told to go and speak to their landlords, and it's an effort to really push the social housing sector to step up and do more. One of the questions we're asking local authorities is what percentage of their awards go to social housing tenants. Again, these are people on lower incomes, so that there's an expectation there, but even so, some of the percentages we're getting back are pretty high. So I think Liverpool and Central Bedfordshire are doing the same, and obviously we haven't got all the responses yet by a long way. Are hoping that the social housing sector will step up and do more. As I've said, we continue to work with other charities. We work very closely with the Children's Society. TAROE Trust turned to us to push for increased crisis support funding, and we're working with a number of MPs as well to push for that increased crisis support spending. And of course, the social housing sector, as we've said many times, there to house some of our most vulnerable citizens, have a huge role to play in ending furniture poverty. And now is the time, more than ever, for them to step up. So the figures in this research really built on our earlier research, looking at the lack of furniture provision in social housing. And as I say, we've worked really hard to encourage and support the sector to introduce furniture schemes, starting with our report No Place Like Home, and then our blueprints for furniture provision in social housing, which goes to everything a landlord needs to know if they're interested in a scheme, from costs, from logistics, from staffing, how to navigate benefits and service charge, and so much more. And we will continue to do what we can to support landlords, and are always happy to meet any housing professionals to sit and have a chat to discuss how they might be able to introduce furniture provision. And while the ideal is a furnished tenancy because it is sustainable, they're getting a return on that investment. You know, some landlords have gifting schemes, hardship funds, which at least obviously means furniture is getting out now. And also looking at furniture reuse as well. You know, that's something that is well worth a landlord looking at, but don't expect it to solve all of the furniture problems. And just to come back to flooring in social housing, so I do think it's important. And as I said, many people outside the sector are horrified and baffled when they find out that the majority of landlords rip out flooring, no matter how good the quality might be. Because flooring's so hard to obtain, so why take out what's already there? In some cases, of course, it's necessary if the flooring's particularly dirty, poor quality, or contaminated in some way. Sometimes landlords tell us, oh, we need to check the flooring, you know, the floor underneath. Fine, put it back down again afterwards then. In many cases, it's removed because that's just what they do. It's the routine, but it doesn't have to be that way. So this is a quote here from 13 Group, who install flooring now in all new relets, and they also provide decoration and pre-loved furniture. They say it's generated a net overall saving for their organisation of over £1 million due to reduced churn, lower void costs, reduction in key-to-key time, and their arrears rate fell from £7 million to £4.8 million. Plus, of course, the tenants have flooring, so it's a win-win. I've mentioned the changes due in Wales. We had a debate in Parliament a couple of weeks ago, where a government minister has said that they were looking very closely at flooring, and has agreed to meet with us to discuss that further. So we do think change is on the horizon. I honestly believe that there's a strong chance that flooring hopefully will be mandatory in the next Decent Home Standard, as opposed to just in the guidance. So it would be great for the sector to get ahead of this, and we're here to help in any way that we can. So these are our recommendations for change. Local welfare is very fragmented, as we've seen. It's a postcode lottery. It depends where you live, if there's a scheme or not. But where it is properly funded, it works really, really well. There have been some issues with the Household Support Fund. As I said, the announcements of the various tranches of the fund have come at really last minute. I think the second tranche was announced on something like the 23rd of March to start on the 1st of April. By that point, local authorities had let go staff and wound down schemes, then they've got to ramp it back up again. Now we know this year there was £1 billion made available for this financial year, which is great. So it'd be wonderful to get an early announcement for the future as well. We found, though, that too many local authorities are using the Household Support Fund to provide direct grants. So a lot of it goes on providing food vouchers for families on free school meals in the school holidays, which of course is absolutely, you know, vital. But that's a big chunk of it already gone. And in majority of areas, it's used for, so, you know, everybody on particular benefits will get a cheque for 50 quid or 80 quid, as opposed to allowing people to apply into it for support. So the first tranche of the Household Support Fund, I think only 16% of it was available for people to apply for support in their area. The rest of it was all sort of distributed. But we've regularly called on the government to give more funding for local welfare schemes, and it's not made any difference. Instead, they announced the Household Support Fund, and they've continued to fund it well. So in a very pragmatic approach, we're saying, okay, we'll simply rebrand local welfare schemes as the Household Support Fund. Government seems to like that. Let's keep it, but keep the best practice of those good local welfare schemes with their focus on furniture and appliances and allowing people to apply for support. But as I said, we just call it Household Support Fund to get the government on board. We need it to be permanent rather than these short-term funding announcements. So local authorities can really plan their provision, maintain those current funding levels, I think is really important, of £1 billion a year for at least 3 years. And we want to ensure that furniture and appliances are at the heart of the provision. So we've also been calling for 50% of it to be ring fenced for furniture and appliances, which is actually a little bit lower the current local welfare spend on furniture and appliances. And of course, then we want that progress in Wales to be replicated across the rest of the UK with regards to flooring provision. And the recommendations for the social housing sector are clear and to the point. For us, it's about everybody playing their part. So the social housing sector can help those tenants who were on benefits unlikely to remain on benefits, to lift them out of furniture poverty through furnished tenancies. And then in our wider group of charities, we're looking at ways we can support landlords with the introduction of furniture rental schemes to allow furnished tenancies to be more suitable for tenants who perhaps might move off benefits. It gives them more flexibility to return items if they need to and bring the service charge down. But I do think landlords need to be honest about that group of tenants who are on benefits and likely to stay on benefits, and for those, furnished tenancy is ideal. And then that means they won't be applying to the local welfare fund or the household support fund or grant giving charities, because they'll have all they need, and it just frees up those resources for others. And it's about everybody, as I say, everybody playing their part. And the immediate quick win on here, of course, would be flooring. Immediately, we would like landlords to start removing decent quality flooring, clean it, and leave it in for new tenants. And then furniture reuse, we've got to get better at furniture reuse. There's lots of fantastic furniture reuse charities out there. And if you want to know who are the furniture reuse charities in your area, do look at the Reuse Network website. It's the membership charity for furniture reuse charities who have furniture poverty as their charitable mission, as opposed to the likes of perhaps the British Heart Foundation, who are raising money for a different cause. They do a fantastic job of championing the sector, and they have a charity finder on their website. But there are also huge quantities of really good quality reusable furniture collected by local authorities through bulky waste contracts, the big waste companies, large quantities of items disposed by private businesses. Premier Inn has been replacing all of their mattresses in all of the hotels. So, huge volumes of really good quality items that really should go to a different home. Here in Liverpool, Bulky Bob's has got the world's first mattress cleaning machine. So what we would like to do is to have furniture reuse hubs in key sort of regional locations around the UK. We could have a mattress cleaning machine in there as well, and then it's a hub for things like all of those mattresses to come in on. But we have to be really honest about the costs involved. The public and the private sector cannot expect the third sector to carry the can for this and to say, look, we're going to give you all of these items. You can't sell any of them. You have to give them all away, but we're not going to give you any money. So how do they cover their costs? So, there has to be some realistic conversations about, well, if we can sell some at low cost, that covers the costs of the warehousing, the logistics, the staff involved, and giving the rest away for free. So we just need to be realistic about that. And having these regional centres, it will provide comprehensive coverage for national companies for things like reusing the mattresses from the big hotel chains, because there'll be something in every area to get them all to. And other big sort of take back schemes, the likes of AO and Currys and Dixons and John Lewis's, etc., who have items coming back in, somewhere for them to go out to. So we want that to work with all of the great reuse charities to get pre-loved furniture out to those who need them. And of course, we are in a climate emergency as well, so this will help with our sort of net zero targets too. And at the end of the day, furniture poverty is about poverty. It's about too many people who simply don't have enough money to live on. The Guarantee Our Essentials campaign, coordinated by Joseph Rowntree Foundation and TAROE Trust, is aimed at getting universal credit up to a level that means people can cover the essentials, the basics, and that's things like food, fuel, rent, etc. But even those figures, even their calculations, don't include the ability to put a little bit aside each month to cover the cost of replacing furniture and appliances. But we're so far back now. There's such a big leap to go to get people up to a reasonable standard of living. So of course, those with nothing, that they will still need help. So we think these welfare reforms are urgently needed. Scrapping the benefit cap, removing the 2-child limit on benefits, and raising the local housing allowance to ensure, I think that's really important as well, to ensure that service charge, which covers the cost of furniture for a furnished tenancy, will help with the introduction of furnished tenancies across the UK. So lots and lots and lots of information there. As I've said, all of the reports I've talked about, including the extent of furniture poverty, is on our website. Obviously, we'll take some questions now, but equally, if anyone wants to have a separate conversation with me, please do feel free to get in touch. Oh, 26 things.
Well, Claire, thank you very much. Wow, there was so much. Your presentation was filled with so many. I was going to say so many facts, but so many shocking facts, if I'm actually honest, because just quite literally the extent of poverty which you're exposing there is quite, well, it's very alarming, isn't it?
It's hard, I think. There is always the risk that these figures wash over you in the end. It's 300,000 this and 2 million that. And I was reading a quote the other day, which like if something happens to one person, it's a tragedy. If something happens to 1 million people, it's a statistic. I can't speak now. But these are all individual people's lives, and we cannot lose sight of that, which is why we're trying to do a lot more to share people's stories and to talk about that human impact of living in furniture poverty.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the other thing which was striking to me was the connectiveness of all of the different things, and then therefore the knock-on effects of that. So for instance, if you've not got flooring, there's also the issue about it's more difficult to heat your home, and then you've got to pay more money out. If you've not got if you've not got a fridge, then you've got to kind of keep going to get renewable goods and so forth. So I'm aware there were a number of questions. We'll come to them in a moment, but I was listening to some, I don't know, so-called experts anyway, economic experts, who were talking about some of the issues that we're experiencing presently, because earlier today the rate of inflation, or the latest rate of inflation, was announced, wasn't it? And it's remained higher, and much higher than other countries. So they were comparing across the Eurozone and America, and with the exception of Italy, which was fairly close to ours, I think all of the other countries were a lot lower now in terms of their inflation figures. And what they were saying was that how long and what the knock-on effects and causation of that. They were talking about the underlying issues why there's debate is that there's been, for instance, lack of investment in the NHS over a number of years pre-pandemic. We were then more exposed through the pandemic. We've got, therefore, a higher level of health-related issues, which has a knock-on effect on the workforce and the ability of people to work, which then has a knock-on effect to kind of labour shortages, which is then pushing wage inflation up, and then we were also kind of more exposed by some of the other kind of macroeconomic factors, but all of which, who are the people who are most adversely affected by this are the people who have the lowest wages or the lowest income levels, and it's kind of that it's a downward spiral, isn't it? That it's kind of almost where you've got kind of this crisis situation. Yep. All of the factors are all interplaying to create what often people call that perfect storm, don't they? But that's what we're seeing there. Yeah. So and then I was also struck by the kind of almost short-sightedness of some of the points which you'd raised around the kind of the economic benefits of investing in home as well. So we've talked a lot in the past. There's been something called an investment, not a cost, around the benefits of properly engaging with tenants, and that also has financial benefits. We're seeing what you are highlighting is exactly the same in relation to furniture poverty related issues. So Brian had his hand up first, and I know he made a comment around DWP as well, so it could be related to that. And then Leslie. So Brian.
Good morning. I just find it, I was going to say fascinating, but infuriating is probably more the word. That you've had a series of government ministers who have decided that they can live on, or they can have a meal for 30 pence, but unfortunately that's subsidized. And I don't think in a lot of cases it's taken into account, not just on benefits, but when somebody's provided with, as has normally happened, the bricks and mortar to live in, to make that home, and signposting people to all these charitable organizations who are doing fantastic work. But they are charitable organizations.
Yeah.
There is no fundamental safety net there for people, you know, who for one reason or another may have become homeless. And then when you tell somebody that, oh yes, if you want to go and get this and you want to go and get that, you go here, you go there, you go somewhere else. They're trying to move into and make a home, and they end up spending the first 6 months of their time in that home trying to straighten things out. It doesn't give them the opportunity to settle.
No,
and
not
I
at all.
think this is where, and I know one organization, certainly, I'm not sure if it was 13, I've highlighted the fact that they've reduced the amount of ended tenancies from people and groups who were there. I have this dreaded fear that the old thing of common sense seems to have gone out the window when it comes to making decisions, because the impact is just unbelievable on people who have little or nothing and no support in a lot of cases.
You're absolutely right, Brian. And I think, you know, one of the challenges at the moment is there are so many pressing needs out there. You know, there are people who can't afford to eat. Okay, well, that needs to be top priority. Then you can't afford to heat your home. Well, in the winter, that's another top priority. And then I do believe that sort of furniture and appliances could come after that. But, you know, we're finding now that, as I've said, 40 million people can't access a local crisis support scheme. So when we get emails from people in those areas, we have to direct them to the charitable sector. But again, I know so many of the grant making charities are reassessing their grant schemes and how they're distributing their funding, because they're so overwhelmed with applications. So actually it's very hard to access grant support now as well. And it's starting to get to the case where there is nowhere for people to turn. And yet, as we say, the benefits of providing people with furniture are very clear. You know, there was a study by the National Audit Office that said investing £500,000 in local crisis support can save the public purse £9.7 million. We had the figures there from 13 Group, you know, and even they're not spending any more money, they're spending it in a different way. So it is absolutely the right thing to do, and we will continue to shout as loud as we can. And you know, hopefully. I
think the classic one is somebody who's diabetic.
Yeah, absolutely. We've had a lot of those with no fridge to store their insulin. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
And you know, if you've got a situation where they can't use the insulin, then they end up having to go back, and it's cost them more money to provide the insulin.
Or having to have a hospital admission because they haven't managed the condition. You know,
it's a silly thing, but you can probably buy a fridge to store insulin for about 100 quid.
Yeah, and things like bed blocking, you know, not being able to discharge people from hospitals because their homes haven't got a working cooker and things like that. So, you know, I've spoken to hospitals about whether it will be worth investing on their side, but you know, we may well get to that stage. Thanks, Brian. Leslie, you had a question.
Oh, I'm just so depressed.
Sorry.
No. I mean, it needs to be said, but I mean, and I think it's really, really powerful. It's just, you know, in the work that Darren and I do about trying to change the narrative that is kind of out there, the stigmatization of social housing tenants, and you know, even people in you know, my you know, people know what I do and how I speak up for tenants, and people still make those comments about, well, you know, if they actually didn't smoke or have 5 kids, or, you know, if they didn't, you know, have a big screen TV, you know, it's that kind of, it's the kind of national narrative, the othering that has been so powerful. It's really hard to battle that. So when people hear this, it's like, you know, the people that actually know that it's real, but it's the kind of, how does that break through to regular people? Like, well, you know, they should just get off their ass and get a job.
But I think the pandemic was a real leveler, and I think that narrative tone changed during the pandemic, probably not far enough.
Yeah.
But I think people, you know, suddenly realize, oh my God, you know, circumstances can change really quickly, and we can all be in a difficult position. And I do feel, you know, you're still going to get the likes of the Mail and what have you, who are going to stick with their tone. But I do feel, I mean, when our No Place Like Home report came out, and then the first local welfare report, we had coverage on the BBC and the Mirror. Didn't dare look below the line, because you knew it was going to be people commenting, saying, oh, you know, what's wrong with people, blah, blah, blah. Tentatively dipped my head in the last few articles, and it is really different, you know. Again, not enough probably, but I do think that tone has changed. Now we need to match that with sufficient investment and an acknowledgement that actually it's not just the right thing to do, but it's a sensible thing to do.
Yeah,
as well.
and that, you know, that's what Darren was alluding to. It's like the investment, not a cost, and involvement that we've been banging on about. Just with regards to your stats about the just over 2 million people in social housing, that's a third of social housing. So to add to your stats, that is 33% of all people that live in social housing, because there's 6 million social housing homes.
4 million homes.
Yeah.
So it's hard.
Well, they say 6, isn't it? Or is it? It's 4 million. Yeah. So it's just, I mean, that's the thing. It's like, that's shockingly bad. And I think with the, you know, the squeezed middle, people that actually own their homes, going to have, you know, this mortgage crisis that is starting to kind of unravel everybody. People are going to be trying to save themselves. So it's about, you know, how do you keep this kind of narrative? I think the other practical thing is, when people hear about this and people are watching this webinar, like, what can people on the ground do? And, you know, Darren and I were talking in the chat. When my father died, he left a whole house full of furniture that my sister and I had furnished homes, right? He had, you know, a very good working washing machine, fridge, freezer, you know, all the electrical goods, gardening equipment. We didn't need any of that. Most charities will not take electrical goods because they don't want to go through the testing. I had to search out a Christian, like a local Christian charity that could test the stuff and then actually rehome it to people in need. But that was me doing a lot of, because I just didn't want it to go to landfill, or, you know, but that is a lot of work. And I think that off the back of this, it is about getting like the, you know, the kind of local networks in place, and also contact, you know, because there's a whole, you know, in our area, I live in West Oxfordshire, we have fridges, we have a whole kind of food preservation kind of movement, like stuff kind of being prevented from going into landfill, and kind of working with charities on the ground to kind of be able to signpost. Because, you know, if I want to get rid of some stuff, or if, you know, someone dies and I don't just want to give it to a charity shop that is going to put the prices up, and the people that we're talking about can't even afford to shop at charity shops because the price is so expensive. But to actually get it into people's direct hands.
So it is really, really difficult. I agree. And that's why we're talking about these regional reuse hubs. And we want local authorities to be involved in that with their bulky household waste contracts. And the big waste collectors, the likes of Veolia and Suez, etc. And, you know, there needs to be some owners. So your appliances will never go to landfill because of the WE directives, which were European regulations to say that, you know, you have to recycle and not reuse, but recycle, which is, so that's a positive change. The reuse network, their members are those who are not just trying to flog things for as much as possible. They're trying to sort of end furniture poverty. They may still sell some things. A lot of them do, and I think more do appliances now than did before. But then you have situations, so Bulky Bob's, just to tell you another little story, Bulky Bob's, our big furniture reuse charity, over 20 years ago, we spoke to Liverpool City Council and said, you have a lot of furniture that you collect in your bulky waste contract, but a lot of people without furniture. Let us collect it for you, and then we will give furniture away for free to people who need it. We've done that for them for over 20 years. We've given away hundreds of thousands of items of furniture and diverted thousands, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of tons of waste from landfill. And then last year they've taken the contract in-house because it's cheaper to put it all in a hole in a field than it is to pay us to do the reuse. So we're back to the conversation of having another conversation with the council. You know, that furniture that's going in a hole in the field. We really could. So we're back full circle. So, you know, it's really difficult. We can't expect the third sector to cover all the costs of this at all. You know, admittedly, it's not right for the public sector to pay for everything. Let's have some sensible grown-up conversations about what we can do. You know, the cost of disposing of items, look at that cost and divert that to the charitable sector for them to reuse the items, and then consider the other savings you'll be making by them reusing these items, those wider savings to the public purse, and just have a fair and equitable distribution to make sure that everybody's, you know, getting their fair share. But absolutely, we get people like that all the time who will say, oh, I've got all this furniture and nobody wants it. And you know, there are, for example, if you chopped a fire label off an upholstered item, unfortunately no one can use that. That is the law. You know, it has to be disposed of, unfortunately. But yeah, there are areas of the country where they're really poorly served by furniture reuse charities, but you know, it can't be their responsibility to be the ones to do that. But reuse, I think, is a key part of the answer. Absolutely.
So I mean, because I mean, I know that the whole devolved agenda, so each council is kind of, you know, if you happen, you know, as a postcode lottery, but how do we on a national scale get the conversation so that that you know, that your local authority buys into it? Because I mean, you know, I mean, obviously everyone on this call is kind of on the journey with you.
Yeah.
So, but it's like, you know, are you lobbying, you know, central government, or are you, you know, are we supposed to be lobbying our local councils and just hoping that something is going to happen? But then how do you kind of share best practice so other councils can go, oh yeah, that kind of works?
Yeah, no, I think from a reuse perspective, it's I think it's local authorities, so it's your councillors, it's writing to your councillors asking what do they do with their bulky household waste, who has their bulky household waste collection contract, and what are they doing with the reusable furniture, and pointing out some of those benefits. I mean, you know, we're a team of 2 people. There's only so much that we can do by the time we've done all of our research and what have you. So a lot of our focus has been on social housing, has been on you know, working with landlords, supporting landlords, obviously carrying out that research and the things we do with MPs, with the local government association around local welfare. I'm a trustee of the reuse network, so they're having conversations with, I think it's DHL, to look at using some of their empty premises as the sort of the starting point for regional hubs. And they've already got relationships with John Lewis, Currys and Dixons for reuse members to go and take some of the take back items to reuse them. So there is some fantastic work going on out there. I had hoped to do a little bit more on reuse. We've got a case study on Stockport Housing Group. They've got a good furniture reuse scheme. I think someone talked about it in the chat. You know, it's we do say to landlords, be realistic about the amount of quality reusable furniture that will be left behind in your properties. You know, you're not going to solve furniture poverty for your tenants by operating a reuse scheme, but you might help some, you know, and it can provide some perhaps training opportunities and volunteering opportunities for tenants while you do it, and it's a start. So I think for all of this, you know, unless we have conversations here about what should our focus be and how do we end it full stop, furniture poverty. Well, to do that, we'd have to end poverty. So for now, I think there are lots of different solutions. So, you know, if you are a tenant of a housing association, which, you know, presumably everybody here is connected to a social housing provider in some way, speak to them. You know, are you providing furnished tenancies? Why not? We think social landlords, we think the housing stock, 10% of it should be provided as furnished. And that's based on the figures from Extent. The Extent report is based on the work we do when we spoke to dozens of landlords when putting the blueprint for furniture provision together, looking at the provision that's out there and the level of demand. So, you know, absolutely speak to your landlords, speak to your MPs about adequately funding local crisis support, and speak to your councillors to find out, has your local authority got a local welfare scheme? And if not, why not? And what they're doing with their bulky household waste. So, you know, I think it's looking at all of these different areas and seeing if we can drive some change.
Well, I would like to have reuse on as a webinar, Darren. Can we get
I'm happy to do that. I can put something together for you and talk about reuse.
Yeah, if there's demand. I mean, it's not just for me. It's not just me. It's people on the call today want on the session today, wasn't it? That, oh, I can see some thumbs up. Yeah, if you that would be really interested.
I mean, for me, it's like, this is really, like, everyone has said, like, it's really horrifying, but then it's like, I want to get into action. So it's like, what can I do as someone living in my local community? What can we do as activists in the social housing sector? How can we help you get platformed on, conferences, because this needs to be, a conversation that continues, and it connects with so much of the other welfare reform stuff going on. And it, it dovetail, it just is another piece of the, health, housing, cost of living pie, really. And
Leslie, I think Deb's been very
sorry.
Yeah, very patient. So
sorry, Deb.
I'm gonna say, before that, I just say I can't believe it. I didn't know that Bulky Bobs had lost the contract with Liverpool. I used to work with Greg Walker back like 20 odd years ago when I think he was the first general manager, wasn't he, at the time?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I've been here for nearly 10 years, but I haven't come across back. I mean, we had been subsidising it for a good few years, subsidising the cost of the contract, because the reuse, to reuse items. First of all, your collections are going to take long because you have to look after the items on the van. You can't just chuck them on. And secondly, of course, to reuse items, there's a cost. We had a shop that people go in and pick what they wanted. There's the logistics, there's the cost of the shop, there's the diesel and the vans to deliver the things for free for people's homes. But all of those people will now be going to the City Council's local welfare scheme, so I think that, but they're separate budgets. One's a waste budget, one's a revenues and benefits budget. So it's really difficult. And, I know Liverpool was in a very difficult position. They've had huge government cuts, but still, I am sorry. Deb was waiting, wasn't she?
Yeah, Deb. Are you there, Deb? Well, I hope we haven't offended you, Deb, by keeping you waiting too long.
Sorry.
I'm sorry.
What I'll do, Deb, I'll pop my email address in the chat. And then if you or anyone else has any questions that might perhaps come to you later, then please do just drop me an email. And as I say, I'm always happy to have a chat or a meeting at another time.
Sorry, I just bombed out there. It just threw me out. Never done that before. Very quick. One thing I'm going to say is about care of the items we donate. I work for a housing association. Most of the new allocations do have carpet, and they have kitchens, and we make sure that the goods are there. And we are aware, and you mentioned window covering. We do window coverings.
Brilliant.
And we do have furniture reuse. So we do look with a common sense eye at the need of whatever is happening in that premises. It's not everyone. One of the things I'm going to add here is mental health, and the conversation and the dialogue when people are actually allocated properties, because sometimes that's so poor, we have no idea who's being allocated a property or the information that comes with them, because they're not being upfront when we take that letting application, and not actually disclosing things like mental health. And they don't have a lack of income, they have a lack of, they make very poor decisions about the money they have.
Yeah.
And sometimes that needs to be built into the conversation. One thing quickly someone mentioned was, why don't we have a bigger platform? Well, if we had someone like a Marcus Rashford, who was actually raising the fact that this happens, and it isn't all just about people who are in the worst situations and the stigma that's connected, because we also now have social housing residents complaining about the newer social housing residents. Because of the behaviours and the lack of care about what they're allocating. They can have a brand new property, and within 9 months we can have a washing machine dumped outside where there's been an argument in the household and it's been broken and dumped. So that it's the care and how we get them to realise that these things have a cost. And you're quite right that locally we have 3 small towns and villages who've got a very efficient free Facebook sites where people say, I've just moved in, have you got a mattress? And there's a very good, there's no transport involved in that. All they have to do is like go around the corner and pick something up. And you're right that many of the charities we had links with are finding that they're actually struggling to survive. We've had quite a few shut, and we've also had quite a few that can no longer get volunteers, and part of that is quite a lot of their volunteer force have been targeted by job centres to actually go and get paid jobs, or they've gone back and actually need to earn money. And so I think there's a big thing there about how we change the conversation as to when we gift something, actually it has a cost, and that we expect that there will be some care of what we gift as well. Because I think that if we don't change, if we make it seem like, oh, we're giving it to you because it has no worth. It has a worth.
Yes, it's making sure it retains the value. I mean, with regards to Marcus Rashford, my chief exec would love me to find a Marcus Rashford. Believe you me, it has been discussed many times. The closest I've got, which is a long way away, is Mr. Motivator. Has been very supportive for those of you. Mr. Motivator.
Or even Jay Blades, which is
Jay Blades was supposed to come and see us, and he didn't turn up. So we got Matt Allwright came from the One Show. He was very supportive. But yeah, it's somebody who has that. Obviously, Jay Blades is very much the sort of reuse side, and unfortunately, as I say, he didn't come. We were trying to get him to. What we've done in Liverpool is, dusted ourselves off over the Bulky Bobs Liverpool contract, and we've set up we've still got a Bulky Bobs in Oldham, so that still works very closely with, does the collections for the City Council in Oldham. And we've launched a paid collection service here in Liverpool. So rather than Liverpool City Council does have a free service, but we're offering a paid collection service across Merseyside where we'll come and collect your items. So as I always say with these things, somebody's got to cough up somewhere. Now, with it going through the City Council, the council were paying us for the collections, so we could afford to give it away for free. Doing the paid collections, better off households are paying for us to come and collect at a particular time, and we'll come indoors and we'll go upstairs. And then that's the cost covered for us to be able to give it away for free. So it's just having a sort of realistic. But if anyone's got a Marcus Rashford-esque family member or friend, do send them my way, please.
I believe Nadine Doris is looking for a new job.
Yeah, you're all right. Thanks, Brian.
One last thing was you mentioned about the welfare funds, and our local authorities, what they're doing is now they're actually looking at those in work who are asking for welfare, because they were
normally you have to go on universal credit. Whereabouts are you from, Deb?
Hampshire. So
Hampshire, yeah, you've got no local welfare scheme in Hampshire. You haven't had for years.
No, so, and the local authorities have had some allocations of monies, but what they've done is they've actually given it out to some of us as housing associations so that we can allocate it.
But then if you're in a time of need, you don't know where to go to. And there's some real sort of disparities. Yeah. Bradford, for example, have a assisted purchase scheme, so you have to take it alone and you have to pay it back. There's totally different thing, hence obviously why the first report was called a postcode lottery. And yes, to a certain extent local authorities know their local areas better than Westminster, better than another local authority, but I think in some areas it's clear that decisions aren't being made with the best interests of the residents.
Nope.
Well, I think that brings us to a nice point to stop for today. But I don't think this will be the last that we'll see of you, Claire. I think it sounds like
no, it won't. Can I just mention Leslie's comment there about Martin Lewis? Oh, I tried with Martin Lewis. I got a retweet. I got a retweet from Martin Lewis, and I danced around the kitchen. And I have been trying with Martin Lewis.
Okay,
he's a busy man, but yeah.
Okay, I'm going to talk to you offline.
Good. Great. Right.
Yeah.
Exciting.
And can anyone on the call, maybe anyone on the call can kind of badger him as well. get him involved.
It's one of my magic skills, getting to whoever you need to get to. Not in a weird stocky way, but like
if it gets results, I don't care, Leslie.
Hopefully Darren can cut that out of the webinar before we post it.
What to showcase it and just have a little clip?
No, to kind of cut that part out. That was I'm not a stalker.
No, it's all sticky. It's staying in, Leslie. Okay, right. Thank you, Claire. Brilliant. As always, so informative. A couple of kind of things just to say. We're taking a break next week because we're aware that Housing 2023 is taking place, so we don't want to conflict with that. So our next webinar is the week after, the 5th of July, which is about innovations in property management, and with a specific look at damp and mold related issues and a study by York University. The week after that, and it's just for note, it's a change to our usual 11 o'clock start time. It's an afternoon session, but on the 12th of July, we're welcoming Lisa Birchall from the National Federation of Almos and Brian, who's on the call today. And they're going to be talking about the latest report on tenant scrutiny. And fingers crossed, we'll have our reports on scrutiny by then as well. So if it's back and completed. So thank you everyone. A big kind of collective applause for Claire. Brilliant to have you back. And thanks everyone who managed to join today as well. And if you're watching this on playback and wanted to get in touch with Claire, she has given her email address as claire.donovan@endfurniturepoverty.org. So great. Well, enjoy the rest of your day. The weather forecast looks okay here, so if you manage to get out, enjoy. And we'll see you in 2 weeks for our next webinar. So thanks very much, everyone. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone.